Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. In the far reaches of the cosmos, there was a world unlike any other, a planet known as Dreamstar. It wasn't a place of solid matter and physical form, but one composed of endless streams of thought and emotion. On Dreamstar, the inhabitants lived not through their bodies but through their minds, weaving the very fabric of dreams that connected them to other planets, other beings, and other lives. They were called Dreamweavers, beings of pure thought who could enter and manipulate the dreamscapes of those in distant galaxies. Through dreams, they influenced the emotions, desires, and sometimes even the destinies of those they touched. Yet, for all their power, Dreamweavers remained attached, distant, and governed by strict rules. Never interfere beyond observation. Never entangle yourself in the emotions of others. Lilith was one of the most skilled dreamweavers on Dreamstar, known for her precision and control. Unlike some of her peers, she adhered strictly to the laws of her world. Emotions were not meant for dreamweavers. They were, after all, beings of a higher order, above the frailties of mortal minds. But for Lilith, it wasn't just about following the rules, it was about maintaining the balance between the realms of thought and dream. She believed in her purpose, in the importance of preserving the delicate equilibrium between worlds. On a routine exploration of dreamscapes across the universe, Lilith entered a human dream for the first time. She had passed through countless dreams before of alien species and distant worlds, yet this one felt different. The human's mind was intricate, its emotions raw and unfiltered. She hovered above the dreamscape like a phantom, observing from a distance as the dream unfolded. The dreamer, a man named George, was a writer on Earth, and his dream world was rich with detail, a reflection of his vivid imagination. He sat alone at a table in a dark room, surrounded by empty chairs, papers strewn across the floor as if abandoned mid-thought. Lilith's curiosity was piqued. Humans were not usually so vivid, so emotionally resonant. She saw George reach for a blank sheet of paper, his face a mask of frustration. His hand trembled slightly as he tried to write, but the words wouldn't come. She felt his frustration, the heavy weight of loneliness that seemed to pervade every corner of the room. His dream shifted, as human dreams often did, from one place to another. Now he was in a park, now on a busy street, always alone, always searching for something just out of reach. It was a puzzle, a tangled web of emotion and thought, and Lilith couldn't help but be intrigued. Normally, she would observe, take note, and then move on. But this time, she lingered. There was something about George's dream that drew her in. Something she couldn't quite name. She watched as he walked through his dream, lost in a world of his own making, and for the first time in her existence, Lilith felt something stir inside her, an echo of the emotion George himself was feeling. It was fleeting, but it was enough to unsettle her. She quickly withdrew from his dream, returning to the quiet serenity of Dreamstar, but George's dream stayed with her, lingering in her thoughts like a shadow she couldn't shake. Over the next few cycles, Lilith found herself returning to George's dream again and again. She told herself it was out of curiosity, a professional interest in the complexity of his mind. But deep down, she knew there was something more. Each time she entered his dream, she felt a little closer to him, a little more connected to the emotions that rippled through his subconscious. George, oblivious to her presence, continued dreaming, unaware that he was no longer alone in his dreams. He spoke to her without knowing she was there, his thoughts spilling out in fragments and half-formed ideas. He dreamed of writing, of finding meaning in his words, but also of connection, of a deep loneliness that colored every aspect of his life. One night, Lilith did something she had never done before. She reached out to him, not just as an observer, but as a participant in his dream. She materialized in front of him, taking the form of a woman, a muse, as he would later call her. George stared at her, his dream self confused and intrigued. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice thick with dream logic. Lilith hesitated for the briefest of moments, unsure how to answer. She had never interacted with a dreamer before, not like this. But something about George made her want to break the rules, to step beyond the boundaries of what was allowed. "I'm here to help you," she said, her voice soft, almost melodic. She didn't tell him who or what she really was. George blinked, his confusion fading as the dream shifted. "Help me?" he repeated, as if the idea was foreign to him. How? Lilith didn't know the answer. She hadn't come to help, not in the way humans understood help. She had come because she was drawn to him, to the depth of his emotions, to the richness of his dreams. "I can help you find what you're looking for," she said, though even she didn't fully understand what that meant. George nodded slowly, as if accepting her words without question. Dreams were like that, a fluid, malleable, not bound by the same logic as the waking world. He took her hand, and together they walked through his dream, the scenery shifting around them in the way that dreams often do. Lilith felt a strange sensation in the pit of her being, a warmth, a connection. It wasn't the cold detachment she was used to when observing other dreams. This was something different, something real. As the cycles passed, Lilith continued to visit George's dreams. Each time, their connection deepened. George began to open up to her in ways he never had with anyone in the waking world. He spoke of his loneliness, of his struggles as a writer, of the way he felt disconnected from the people around him. Lilith listened, and for the first time in her existence, she felt something akin to empathy. She began to understand the depth of human emotion, the complexity of their lives. It fascinated her, drew her in like a moth to a flame. But as their bond grew, so too did Lilith's internal conflict. She knew she was breaking the rules, crossing a line that no Dreamweaver was supposed to cross. She was no longer just an observer. She was involved, entangled in the very emotions she was supposed to remain distant from. And worse, she was starting to feel those emotions herself. The more time she spent with George, the more she felt his pain, his joy, his longing. It was intoxicating, and terrifying. One night, as Lilith entered George's dream, she found herself unable to maintain the same level of control she had once prided herself on. The dream shifted, not according to George's subconscious, but according to her own emotions. The dreamscape became a reflection of her own inner turmoil. The clouds darkened, the air grew thick with tension. George looked at her, concern flickering in his eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked, his dream self more aware than usual. Lilith hesitated. How could she explain to him what was happening? How could she tell him that she was falling, not just for him, but into the very emotions she had been trained to avoid? "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. George reached for her hand, his touch grounding her in the dream. "You can't tell me," he said softly, his voice filled with the kind of warmth Lilith had only ever observed in others. It was the same warmth that had drawn her to him in the first place, the same warmth that now threatened to consume her. But before she could respond, the dream shattered. Lilith awoke in her own mind, back on Dreamstar, her connection to George severed abruptly. She gasped for breath, disoriented and shaken. It took her a moment to realize what had happened, as someone had forcibly pulled her out of the dream. And she knew exactly who it was. The Dreamstar Council. They had been watching her, monitoring her interactions with George, and now they had intervened. She was summoned before the council, her heart pounding in her chest as she stood before the elders of her world. They were ancient beings, their forms shimmering with the light of countless dreams. Their voices echoed in her mind, cold and detached. "You have broken the rules, Lilith," one of them said, their voice devoid of emotion. "You have interfered in the dreams of a mortal, and worse, you have allowed yourself to become emotionally entangled." Lilith opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She had no defense. She had done exactly what they were accusing her of. She had allowed herself to feel. "You know the consequences," another elder said, their voice sharp and unforgiving. "You must sever all ties with the human and return to your duties as a dreamweaver. Emotions are not for us. They are a weakness, a distraction." But Lilith didn't feel weak. For the first time in her life, she felt alive. Lilith stood before the council, her mind spinning. The cold, emotionless presence of the Dream Star elders surrounded her, pressing in on her like a weight she hadn't known she carried until now. Her connection to George had changed everything. It had opened her eyes to a reality she never imagined. She had always believed in her role as a dreamweaver, in maintaining balance, but now, standing in the icy judgment of the council, she realized that balance had no meaning if it cost her what she had found. "I understand," she finally managed to say, her voice strained. She didn't know if she was speaking the truth or just saying what the council needed to hear. "But he's different. This connection is different." One of the elders shifted, their form flickering. "You have lost your perspective, Lilith. Humans are temporary. Their emotions are fleeting, fragile things. They are not like us. You cannot allow yourself to be swept up in their transience." Lilith wanted to argue, to explain that it wasn't just about George, or even about his dreams. It was about what he represented or what humanity represented. Their capacity to feel deeply, to care, to suffer and yet find beauty in that suffering. George had shown her that emotions weren't a weakness, that they were a strength. "I haven't lost perspective," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I've gained it. I see now what I couldn't see before." Emotions, said, "they're not a burden. They're what give life meaning. Without them, we're just drifting, existing without truly living." The council remained silent for a long moment, their collective presence cold and unyielding. "You speak from emotion, not reason," one of them said at last. "You will return to Dreamstar, and you will sever your connection to this human. It is the only way to restore the balance you have disrupted." Lilith's heart clenched. Severing the connection meant she would never see George again, never feel the warmth of his presence in the dreamscapes. She would return to her old life, a life of detachment, a life where emotions were nothing but distant echoes of other beings' experiences. The thought of it filled her with a deep, aching sadness. She couldn't go back, and not after everything she had felt, everything she had learned. "I can't," she whispered. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. The council stirred, their disapproval radiating through her mind. "You defy us?" one of them asked, the words vibrating with a dangerous energy. Lilith straightened her shoulders, the weight of her decision settling over her. "I choose to stay. I choose to be with him." For the first time in her life, Lilith saw the flicker of something like emotion cross the faces of the elders, as something akin to disappointment, or perhaps sadness. They had expected her to return to the fold, to abandon this path she had chosen. But Lilith knew that what she was choosing wasn't just Georgia, it was the freedom to feel, to experience life in all its messy, chaotic beauty. "Then you are no longer one of us," the lead elder said, their voice final. "You are no longer a dreamweaver." Lilith's heart skipped a beat. She had expected this, but hearing the words spoken aloud made it real in a way she hadn't anticipated. The council's power reached out, severing the ties that had once connected her to Dreamstar. She felt the sharp, sudden loss of her ability as the ability to slip into dreams, to weave them, to guide others. It was gone, leaving her hollow for a moment. And then she felt something else, something warm and solid, the weight of her own body, the fullness of her own emotions, unclouded by the detachment she had once taken for granted. For the first time, Lilith felt the true depth of her own emotions, not as an observer, but as a participant in her own life. The council's presence faded, and Lilith found herself standing alone in the quiet expanse of Dreamstar. But it no longer felt like home. It felt empty. Without hesitation, she turned away from the dreamscape, her mind reaching out, not through the old pathways of a dreamweaver, but through something more real, more tangible. She found George, as she always had, not in a dream, but in the quiet reality of his waking world. He was asleep when she arrived, curled up in his small apartment, the soft glow of the city lights filtering through the window. She watched him for a moment, taking in the peaceful rise and fall of his chest, the way his face softened in sleep. It was strange, seeing him like these, real and vulnerable, without the surreal filter of dreams. Lilith took a deep breath and let herself feel the full weight of her decision. She had given up everything for Thesa, for him, and for the chance to experience life as humans did. But standing here, watching him, she knew it was the right choice. She had chosen humanity, with all its flaws and wonders, over the cold detachment of Dreamstar. She sat on the edge of the bed, gently placing a hand on George's shoulder. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. For a moment, he looked confused, as if he were still trapped in a dream. But then his gaze focused on her, and the confusion melted away. "Lilith?" he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. Are you real?" She smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm real." George sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes as if to clear away the remnants of the dream. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her arm, as if testing the reality of her presence. "You're really here," he said, his voice filled with wonder. Lilith nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. "I'm here," she said softly, "and I'm not leaving." George stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to process the impossible. And then, without warning, he pulled her into a tight embrace, his arms wrapping around her as if afraid she might disappear. Lilith closed her eyes, leaning into his warmth. It was a feeling unlike anything she had ever experienced before. Real, and so deeply human. She had always thought of emotions as fleeting things, fragile and temporary. But now, she understood that they were what made life worth living. Without them, there was no connection, no meaning. As they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, Lilith felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She had found her place, not in the cold perfection of Dreamstar, but here, in the messy, beautiful chaos of the human world. The days that followed were a whirlwind of adjustment. Lilith had to learn how to navigate the waking world as a human, without the powers she had once taken for granted. Simple things like eating, sleeping, feeling the passage of time were new to her, strange and fascinating in their own way. George was patient with her, teaching her the rhythms of human life, guiding her through the small, mundane details that made up his existence. At first, it was difficult. Lilith had spent her entire existence as a being of pure thought, unbound by physical limitations. But now, she had a body, and with it came all the sensations she had never known before. The warmth of the sun on her skin, the taste of food, the ache of muscles after a long day. It was overwhelming at times, but it was also exhilarating. She was living, truly living, in a way she had never imagined. And through it all, George was there, a constant presence by her side. He didn't question how or why she had come into his life. He simply accepted her, as if she had always been meant to be there. Together, they found a new rhythm, a new way of being that blended the surreal beauty of dreams with the grounded reality of human life. But Lilith knew that her decision had consequences. She had defied the council, abandoned her role as a Dreamweaver, and in doing so, she had changed not only her own fate but also the future of Dreamstar. She didn't know what would happen to her former world, or if the council would ever reconsider their rigid rules about emotions and connections. All she knew was that she had made her choice, and she would stand by it. As the days turned into weeks, Lilith and George built a life together. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when Lilith wondered if she had made the right decision. But then George would take her hand, or whisper something that made her laugh, and all the doubts would fade away. For the first time in her existence, Lilith felt truly alive, and she knew, without a doubt, that she had made the right choice.